Hello everyone, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to explore a deeply touching story about recovery, love, and the quiet strength that comes from human connection. This is the story of a man who stood at the fragile line between life and death, and how kindness, care, and family helped him find his way back, not just to health, but to happiness. It's a journey filled with simple moments, heartfelt emotions, and the true meaning of home. If you enjoy meaningful stories that bring comfort and inspiration, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. In today's story, we follow Dieu, a man who has just crossed the fragile line between life and death after surviving a life-threatening illness. What unfolds is not only his physical recovery, but also a deeply emotional journey of healing, love, and rediscovering what it truly means to belong. After many long days in the hospital, days filled with pain, fear, and uncertainty, Dieu is finally discharged. But instead of returning to the quiet, empty house he once called home, he is faced with one of the most important decisions of his life. Huyen, the woman who never left his side during his darkest moments, firmly refuses to let him live alone again. She insists on bringing him into her home, where she lives with her young daughter Maya, so she can care for him and make sure he never has to face illness and loneliness by himself again. At first, Dieu is hesitant. He feels overwhelmed by guilt, afraid that his presence will become a burden, afraid that he might disrupt the life Huyen and Maya have built together. But through Huyen's quiet devotion, her steady patience, and Maya's innocent warmth, his fears slowly begin to fade. From shared meals and calm evenings to their first trip to the market together, these simple, everyday moments gently weave them into something that feels very much like a real family. This is not a story filled with dramatic twists or shocking turns. Instead, it touches the heart through healing, love, and hope. It is about learning how to accept care, finding the courage to live again after tragedy, and discovering happiness in the simplest moments of life. If you enjoy heartfelt, meaningful stories that bring comfort and inspiration, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss future episodes. Your support truly means everything to us and motivates us to keep sharing stories that heal, inspire, and connect hearts. Thank you for watching and for being part of our journey. Dieu was discharged from the hospital on a calm, windless morning. As he stepped through the hospital doors, the world in front of him felt strangely fragile, almost unreal, like he was walking through a dream he hadn't fully woken up from. Just a few weeks earlier, he had been lying motionless on a narrow hospital bed, his body weak and thin, his breathing heavy and labored, never knowing how much time he had left. The illness had drained him of strength, but even more than that, it had quietly taken away his hope. There was a fear deep inside him, one he never spoke out loud, a fear that maybe he wouldn't make it out alive. Now, standing under the open sky again, that fear hadn't completely disappeared. It had simply changed shape. Huyen stood beside him, holding the discharge papers tightly in her hands. The exhaustion on her face was impossible to hide, yet her eyes were filled with undeniable relief. She looked at him for a long moment, almost as if she needed to confirm that the man standing in front of her had truly crossed back from the edge between life and death. Dieu gave her a faint smile, a weak but genuine one. His thoughts drifted to a small house, a place that had grown used to silence over the years, a house where he had lived alone for a long time, enduring sickness, pain, and countless sleepless nights that no one ever saw. He was about to say that he would go home, that he would rest, that he was fine now. He wanted to say he didn't want to trouble anyone anymore. But Huyen spoke first. Her voice wasn't loud, yet it carried a firmness that left no room for refusal. She told him he couldn't go back to living alone. After everything that had happened, she said, she couldn't bear the thought of him facing illness, fear, and uncertainty by himself ever again. Dieu froze. A warmth spread through his chest, but it was mixed with hesitation and doubt. He understood her concern, and yet he was afraid. Afraid of becoming a burden, afraid of intruding on the peaceful life she shared with her daughter, afraid of taking more than he could ever give back. For a long moment, he stayed silent. In that silence, memories from the hospital came flooding back with painful clarity. Nights when he truly believed he wouldn't survive. Moments when the pain was so unbearable that giving up felt easier than holding on. And then, moments when he opened his eyes and saw Huyen sitting beside his bed, asleep from exhaustion, her hand still holding his tightly, as if letting go would mean losing him forever. It was then that Dieu realized something he had been avoiding. In his weakest, most broken moments, Huyen had never once left his side. So why, now that she was reaching out to him again, was he so afraid to accept her hand? Finally, he nodded. He didn't say much. He simply told her, softly, that he would come live with her, at least for a while. Huyen couldn't hide her emotions. Her eyes turned red, and tears threatened to fall, but she smiled. It was the kind of smile that belonged to someone who had just managed to hold on to what mattered most. The day he moved into Huyen's house, Maya was already waiting at the door. She looked at him with wide, curious eyes filled with excitement. Without hesitation, she ran toward him and wrapped her arms tightly around him. In her innocent voice, she asked if Uncle Dieu would be living with her and her mother from now on. Dieu laughed and nodded, and in that moment, something inside his heart softened in a way he had never felt before. The house wasn't big, but it was warm. There was laughter in the air, the comforting smell of home-cooked food, and a sense of peace he had lost long ago. Still, the first few days of living together were not easy. Dieu was weak. He tired easily and often felt dizzy after just a few steps. Huyen took care of him with a level of attentiveness that sometimes felt almost strict. She wrote down his medication schedule, prepared every meal exactly as the doctor instructed, and firmly forbade him from lifting heavy objects or staying up late. At times, Dieu felt guilty watching her do so much for him, but more than anything, he felt deeply grateful. Maya quickly became his little supervisor. She constantly reminded him to rest and take his medicine, sometimes sitting beside him to tell stories about her day at school. Those simple, ordinary moments made Dieu realize something important. He was no longer alone. One morning, when his health had improved just a little, Huyen suggested that the three of them go to the market together. Dieu hesitated at first, unsure if he was ready. But when he saw the excitement in Maya's eyes, he couldn't bring himself to say no. The morning market was crowded and lively, filled with vendors calling out their prices and the fresh scents of vegetables, fish, and meat mixing in the air. Huyen carefully selected each bundle of greens and each cut of meat, occasionally turning to ask Dieu what he felt like eating. He simply smiled and told her that as long as she cooked it, he would enjoy anything. Maya chattered nonstop, asking for snacks and milk, and the three of them laughed together, looking and feeling like a real family. They also bought a few small household items, a new set of dishes, an unused pot. Simple things that might have seemed insignificant to others, but carried deep meaning for them. They weren't just shopping. They were building a home together, piece by piece, through care, warmth, and companionship. Evenings in the house slowly settled into a gentle, comforting rhythm. As the sun dipped lower and the sky outside softened into warm shades of orange and blue, Huyen would move quietly around the kitchen, preparing dinner. The sound of chopping vegetables and simmering pots filled the space, blending naturally with the calm of the home. Dieu would sit nearby, sometimes helping wash vegetables, other times simply watching, feeling content just being there. At the small table, Maya focused on her homework, occasionally looking up to ask a question or share a story from school. After dinner, the three of them would gather together in the living room. Sometimes they talked about their day. Sometimes they watched a movie, and other times they simply sat in comfortable silence. There were moments when Maya would grow sleepy and lean her head against Dieu's shoulder. Each time that happened, he would stay perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest movement might wake her. In those quiet moments, he felt a warmth in his chest that no medicine had ever given him. From a short distance away, Huyen would watch them, her heart filled with a feeling she couldn't quite explain. Something gentle, something steady, something deeply reassuring. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but it was real. It felt like peace. As days turned into weeks, Dieu's health continued to improve. His appetite returned, his sleep became deeper and more restful, and the constant heaviness in his chest slowly lifted. The mirror no longer reflected a man standing on the edge of collapse, but someone gradually finding his strength again. More importantly, his spirit grew lighter. He laughed more easily. He smiled without forcing it. He began to look forward to each new day. During one of his follow-up visits, the doctor examined him carefully before smiling and saying that his recovery was going remarkably well. The doctor added that a positive mindset was often the strongest medicine of all. Dieu nodded quietly. He knew that what had truly pulled him back from the edge wasn't just treatment or prescriptions. It was the quiet, unwavering love of Huyen and Maya, their presence, their patience, and their belief that he was worth caring for. One late night, after Maya had already fallen asleep, the house grew still. The soft glow of the living room light cast long shadows on the walls. Dieu sat beside Huyen, hesitating for a moment before finally speaking. In a low voice, he thanked her. He thanked her for refusing to let him face illness alone, for giving him a place to return to, and for giving him a reason to keep living, to keep trying, even when he had almost given up. Huyen listened without interrupting. When he finished, she smiled softly, reached out, and took his hand. She told him that family was like that no one ever gets left behind. Her words were simple, but they carried a strength that settled deeply into his heart. Outside that small house, life continued with all its challenges. Recovery still took time. There were days when Dieu felt tired, days when fear crept back in quietly, reminding him of how fragile life could be. But inside the house, there was stability, there was care, there was understanding. Maya continued to bring light into their lives in ways only a child could. She drew pictures and proudly showed them to Dieu, calling him her audience. She insisted on helping set the table and reminded him, sometimes a little too seriously, to take his medicine on time. Her laughter filled the rooms, pushing away the shadows that once lingered there. Huyen balanced everything with quiet strength. She worked, cared for her daughter, and watched over Dieu without complaint. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was asleep, she would sit alone for a moment, letting herself feel the weight of it all. But when morning came, she stood up again, steady and determined, ready to face another day. Slowly, almost without noticing, Dieu began to feel like he truly belonged. He started taking short walks outside, breathing in the fresh air, feeling the ground beneath his feet. He helped with small chores when he could, wanting to contribute, wanting to be part of the rhythm of the household rather than just a guest. There were moments when he caught himself smiling for no particular reason, moments when he realized that happiness didn't always arrive in grand, dramatic ways. Sometimes it came quietly, in the form of shared meals, gentle conversations, and knowing that someone would notice if you didn't come home on time. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the windows, the three of them sat together, sorting through the new dishes they had bought at the market. Maya carefully handed each plate to Dieu, telling him where it should go. He followed her instructions seriously, making her laugh. Huyen watched the scene with a soft smile, realizing how naturally they had grown into this life together. Dieu thought back to the lonely house he once lived in, to the nights filled with silence and pain. It felt like a distant memory now, almost like a life he had lived as someone else. Standing here, surrounded by warmth and laughter, he understood something clearly for the first time. Surviving illness was only part of his recovery. Learning how to live again, how to accept love and connection, was the rest of it. Days continued to pass, each one building quietly on the last. There was no sudden miracle, no dramatic turning point, just steady progress, just healing for Dieu, waking up each morning in a home where the light was left on for him, where familiar voices greeted him, and where laughter waited at the table became the greatest gift he had ever known. It was a happiness he hadn't dared to hope for, born not from perfection, but from care, resilience, and love. And so, within that modest house, there was a man who had once stood at the fragile edge between life and death, a resilient woman who refused to let him fall, and an innocent little girl who reminded them both how to smile. Together, they moved forward, slowly, imperfectly, but
Trong câu
always
chuyện cảm
together.
động này, Huyền
After
đoàn tụ với Đệ
surviving a
sau nhiều tháng
life-threatening
xa cách.
illness,
Mối dây liên kết
Dieu
của
is
họ được
discharged from
củng
the
cố
hospital
bởi sự vắng mặt
and faces
và
a
tình yêu
difficult
bền
choice:
vững. Cùng nhau, họ
return
tập
to a
trung chăm
lonely
sóc cô
life
gái Maya,
or accept the
xây
care
dựng
he
một
has
mái ấm
always
an
been
toàn
afraid to
và tràn đầy
receive.
yêu thương.
Huyen,
Đồng
the
thời
woman
hỗ
who
trợ
never
Tử
left
Vi,
his
một cô
side
gái
during
trẻ
his
đang đối
darkest
mặt với khó
days,
khăn. Những
insists
khoảnh khắc gia
that he
đình
move
chuẩn
into
bị
her
bữa ăn,
home,
dựng lên
where
một
she
tổ
lives
chức
with
cho
her young
Maya
daughter Maya.
và chia sẻ tiếng
At
cười,
first, Dieu struggles
phản
with
ánh
guilt
tình
and
yêu sâu
fear
sắc
of becoming
và
a
sự quan
burden,
tâm lẫn nhau trong gia đình.
but through
Tuy
shared
nhiên,
meals,
sự
quiet
bình yên của họ
evenings,
gián đoạn
and
khi những
simple
kẻ
trips
xâm
to
nhập
the
xuất hiện,
market, he
tìm kiếm
slowly
Tử Vi
begins
và
to
làm
heal,
nổi bật sự mong manh
not just
và những
physically,
nguy hiểm mà
but
họ phải đối mặt.
emotionally.
Những căng
What
thẳng
starts
và
as
bất định,
recovery
Huyền và
soon
Đệ lên
becomes
kế
a
hoạch cho
journey
một
toward
tương lai an toàn
family,
hơn,
belonging,
quyết định trở
and
về
hope.
miền Bắc để gần gũi hơn với gia
As
đình
Dieu
và mang
regains
lại
his
sự ổn
strength,
định cho Maya.
he realizes that
Qua những thử
love
thách,
may be the
mối đe dọa
strongest
và những
medicine of all.
kết
But
nối
when
chân
the
thành,
past
câu chuyện
quietly
ca ngợi
knocks
sức mạnh
again,
tình yêu, gia
will
đình
this
và sự
fragile
kiên cường trong
happiness
công việc,
be enough to
tạo
hold
dựng hy
them
vọng và
together?
an toàn.